going now. So here we go. Good evening, everybody. So this is the third panel. This is in conversation with the author Helen Fields, and it's been chaired by myself, Lynsey Adams, the organiser of this online book festival. So we'll just start with a little introduction. So Helen Fields, an international and Amazon #1 best-selling author. Helen is a former criminal and family law barrister. Every book in the Kalanack series claimed an Amazon #1 bestseller flag. Her next book, well, not her next book, sorry, the latest book in the series, #6, Perfect Kill, came out in February 2020. And Helen also writes as H.S. Chandler, and last year released legal thriller Degrees of Guilt. So Helen's books have won global recognition. Her first historical thriller, These Last Unbroken Things, came out in May 2020. Further standalone, which is out on the 4th of February next year, entitled Shadow Man, which is published by HarperCollins, and Helen's going to do an exclusive reading of that for us. So I'll let you start with your reading.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Thank you for inviting me. What a brilliant festival and a great idea. It's lovely to be here. And thank you for everyone for joining in. I'm going to read you, as Lynsey said, a little bit from the book that's coming out in February of next year. It's called The Shadow Man. It's not part of the Kalanack series, actually. It's a standalone. It's still set in Edinburgh, and it does actually feature a couple of familiar characters if you've read the Kalanack books. And so expect some kind of cameo roles from the superintendent, who we love to hate, and from Elsa, the chief pathologist. So it's set there, and just to give you a tiny bit of background, it's about a man who suffers from something called Cotard syndrome, which is real, and a very disturbing syndrome whereby the person suffering from it genuinely believes that he is already dead and walking around as a dead body with his organs rotting inside him. Fascinating to read about. I'm just going to read you the prologue from that now. Here we go. From a distance, the grave appeared freshly dug and empty. To the birds overhead, though, vision sharp enough to spot the briefest wiggle of worm or skitter of insect, an older coffin was visible in the depths of the hole. Time had rotted the wooden lid. Time, and the pressure of another coffin stacked on top of it. A family grave stores both more memories and more bodies than a single resting place. This hole in the ground, if earth could tell tales, would be fit to burst with stories of bodies come and gone, of hope and disappointment, of dirt disturbed more often than any resting place should ever have to bear. Few visitors attended that somber space, and those who did had not ventured to the far edge for many years. The cemetery was ancient and unused to new requests for burials. It stood beyond the outer limits of the city, in a circle of trees that kept prying eyes out, and the spirits of the dead in. One man came and went as needed. He visited a grave there, and sometimes brought others with him. He would sit in the grass and talk to a gravestone, listening intently, as if waiting for a response. Sometimes he would dig a coffin up, and sometimes he would bury it. Always the same one. Half the time there was a soul to inter, sometimes more than one. Months later he would reappear. Then he would clear out the coffin, place new flowers at the gravestone, put away the remains in the boot of his car after careful stripping and cleaning, drag the coffin into the bushes, and fill the hole in the earth. The birds did not sing on the days he appeared there. No rodent ran through the grounds or hopped from tree branch to tree branch. The sun hid behind clouds. The world seemed to know more tears were to be shed. Now the uppermost section of the family grave stood empty again, merely a matter of waiting for the space to be occupied. Time stood still here, the same ritual repeated until the grave was little more than a revolving door between one world and the next. There we go.
Thank you very much. Sounds so interesting. So that's out in February, the 4th of February 2021.
Yes.
So I would definitely be looking out for that one. So we're going to get to some of the questions. So I just wanted to ask, how did you get started writing?
Do you know, it was something I did a lot when I was much, much, much younger. And then I kind of got into the law, and which is the sort of career that takes over every second of your life and every fibre of your being. And it wasn't until I stopped and I'd had my third child that I had a bit of space and time, and I didn't know what direction my career was going to go in. And I tried writing at that point. And in fact, the first thing I wrote was the book that is now just come out as These Lost and Broken Things. And that was how I got started. That is the book that got me an agent, but it didn't get published at the time. And then while I was waiting for queries to come back on other books, my agent said, look, just, keep writing, do whatever you want to do while we're going ahead querying. And so I thought, right, okay, well, look, I've kind of pushed against this, but I was a criminal lawyer. It wasn't ever going to take me too much effort to come up with a storyline because of all the work I'd done. So I came up with Luke Kalanak in that period of time, and I sent it to my agents and said, look, I've just done this thing. It's really it was just a fill-in project. And they said, no, that's the one. That's the one that is, the publishers will want. And my agents were right. And Kalanak was born, and Ava Turner, his kind of, she's not a sidekick, she's an equal partner. And that's how it went, really. But I always wanted to write. I didn't have the time, and I also just never occurred to me that I could possibly get published. It didn't occur to me. I wouldn't have known how to go about it. I wouldn't have thought it was possible for me. I didn't regard myself as having any recognizable talent as a writer. And it's not until you really get involved in the process of writing. And I went to Winchester Writers Festival, and in fact, that is how I got in contact with Caroline Hardman, who would turn out to be my agent. And that really, completely changed my life.
So still on that same vein, so how did you go about getting, well, you talked about getting your agent Caroline, but how did you get the publishers, or did you find that easy or hard? Or because I know some authors say that they've had to start off like Amazon bestseller books because they've been turned down so many times by publishers that they had to resort to that and then get picked up by a well-known publisher. Or did you find it quite easy to get one?
It's definitely not easy under any circumstances. Even these books that come out as big debuts and look almost effortless, it never is. It won't have been for those people. So as I said, the first book didn't get picked up. The Kalanak book got queried by a lot of publishers, and in the end it went to Avon at HarperCollins. I was very lucky. So that bit of the process wasn't easy. It took a lot of time, and there's a lot of heartache. You get rejections. It's very hard to take. Your ego gets bashed over and over again. And you have days when you just lose faith and you think you can't write and why are you bothering? And then you have a day where you think, actually, I can do this. I was lucky after that because when HarperCollins picked up the Kalanak series, they gave me a 3-book contract. That meant that, for a couple of years of writing, I knew in advance what I was going to do and where I was going to be. And so once I got that first contract with the publisher, things became much more fluid and easy and certain for me. But these are difficult times, and I think one of the issues is that the book you're writing could be brilliant, but if it's not commercial, then it's not going to work. Publishers talk to supermarkets. They say, what are you looking for? What sort of books are you prepared to put on your shelves? What are you interested in? And those buyers, the people who actually take your book and put it into the hands of readers, are tremendously powerful and influential within the publishing industry. And it's not necessarily about following trends, but it is certainly about being commercial with what you're writing.
So did you, when you first started, was any kind of like authors or authors that past or present that was starting to influence your style of writing, or did you just decide that it was going to be a crime novel, or because obviously as you said, it was a historical thriller, the past, the broken things, but did you have any other authors from any other genres that you kind of thought, oh, I want to be like a romance author, or was it definitely always going to be a crime author because you were obviously a lawyer?
You know, it's tricky because I like writing historical because I like the research, and there are things I like about it, which is that it allows you to escape from the current trappings. It's difficult to write modern day crime novels for the simple reason that coming up with something that is new is very, very hard. Coming up with things whereby the police won't have caught you by forensics or because of phone tapping or on a camera or something like this, the desire to get away from technology, writing modern day crime novels, is actually quite complex. It becomes a difficult thing not to find a way of catching your bad guy. The difficulty is actually not making it so that your bad guy would have got caught actually in reality within the first 2 minutes of doing what he did. I like historical because it gives you all sorts of possibilities that aren't open to you in modern day crime novels. And interesting, these Lost and Broken Things, as an example, is set over 2 time periods, Victorian and Edwardian. But so the first ever fingerprint case comes out between 1900 and 1910. Okay, so there's a case of a burglary. So it was the first ever case that was settled on the basis of I think a thumbprint on a box when a guy goes through a window. But you can see then that you've got all sorts of scope for getting away with crimes that you wouldn't possibly get away with now. If you crawled through someone's window, you'd be leaving trace evidence everywhere. So it's good fun to write historical. But I also like that idea of the settings and how people's perceptions change over time, and how excuse me, how our social norms have changed over time. So I like writing historical. In terms of the crime, I have some favorite authors. I love Chris Brookmyre, who definitely inspired me in terms of using Scotland as a location, and the sort of characters that he was then writing, the kind of Jack Parlerbane characters, and the dialogue that he put into his books, which is, I think that nobody is better than Brookmyre at dialogue. But other writers like Mark Billingham, like Val McDermott, the iconic writers of their time, modern day crime writers. And I'm a huge fan of people like Ruth Ware. So yeah, I don't think anyone's influenced my style of writing. They've definitely influenced my desire to write.
So after obviously starting with Luke Kalanick, you then that obviously progressed to 6 novels, and then you decide, then obviously you brought out these Lost and Broken Things. What was the inspiration to do this? Was there anybody that said, oh, we've seen it and we really think this would be a great book, or did you decide, oh, like, I want a little break from writing about Luke and Ava, and just go back to it and like sort of tweak it?
I did go back and tweak it, and actually it was because with people who'd read it earlier, I'd had such positive feedback that I didn't feel like those characters had done everything that I wanted them to do. I wanted them to be able to get out there. And these Lost and Broken Things is about a young woman called Sophia, who is forced to kill by her father when she is just 12 years old. So I won't ruin it, but something happens. And her father says, right, you got yourself into this mess. You've got to get yourself out of it. And she's given no choice but to kill this man. He's a very, very bad man. There's no kind of grey area about this one. But she does kill him. And what she realizes is that she has a capacity to kill. She's also somebody who has a gambling addiction from a very young age, because she goes around with her father's traveling fair with the Romanese. She learns to count cards. She's naturally gifted at it. So when, as an adult, she finds herself suddenly widowed with 2 young children, she has to look after them. she naturally turns to the gaming halls, gaming houses, casinos, we now call them, of their day, and starts a career there. But unfortunately, that becomes a slippery slope to not only working in a very inappropriate capacity for the people who are in the gambling halls, but also to committing further murders. And it's really about how she gets herself out of that mess and out of that life. And I really enjoyed writing that, and I really enjoyed writing her. It was such a strong female lead character that I just didn't feel like I wanted that one to sit in a drawer. And also, I mean, interesting, there are lots of writers these days who are combining traditional publishing with being self-published. It's not a no-no anymore. My publishers knew all about it. I spoke to them in advance. I checked they were okay. It's a different genre, so they were fine with it, and were very, very good and very sensible about it. I did make absolutely sure that we were working hard on quality, on timing, on promotion, so that it felt like a properly, professionally brought out book, because you can't afford to let your standards fall. Just because something is self-published doesn't mean there's any excuse for standards to be lower than a published book. So yeah, I decided to go back to those. But I mean, of course, in the meantime, I'd also released my legal thriller under the name H.S. Chandler. So it wasn't the first time I'd moved away from the police procedural genre, because Degrees of Guilt is a legal thriller, and from the perspective of a woman who is on trial for attempted murder. And you see the trial as it goes through, but you also see the perspective of one of the jurors as the trial goes through. So you've got this woman who, in fact, has been in a coercive control, very, very abusive relationship, and her husband ends up, she thinks, initially dead. It turns out he didn't die. So she is sitting as the defendant in the box, and then you're seeing it from the perspective of Lottie, who is a young woman in her 20s with a young baby, trapped in what she feels is a slightly dull marriage, and the way she feels about seeing the evidence and as it goes through, what unfolds both in the jury room and in the courtroom. And then you also get to look behind the scenes and see what was happening in the marriage. So I'd done that. I'd already written a standalone, and I really enjoyed it. And I think one of the things that I find is that it's very healthy to come out of a series a little bit, like the Kalanick series, work on other books, work on other themes, just like cleansing your palette with something new and different.
Yeah.
And it then enabled me to go back to the Kalanick books much fresher.
Yeah, I can agree with that, because I know as a blogger, sometimes it can, when you're like your TBR pilots, you're constantly reading dark crime. You're either looking for the ones that like Stuart McBride, who've got that sort of like twist, that funny, hilarious twist where you find yourself laughing at the most gruesome of deaths. Or, yeah. I mean, I take myself off when I read maybe a music biography or something like that, because you just need that like light moment of like light reading, where, because sometimes it can get really dark and you're like, okay, But I do agree with that 100%. I'm sure a lot of other bloggers or readers will go off and tell you, like, they'll have their favourite book genre, but they'll go off kind of on a because just to cleanse the palate or just like refresh their minds. I mean, I know that recently I've a long story short, it's Babysitters Club, something I collected as a child, and I've jokingly got it as a birthday present there, even though my birthday was in April. And it's just like it's actually quite fun rereading these and thinking, can see why I liked them as a child, because they do call to the children of that age. But you think it's kind of like a nostalgia thing as well, kind of thing. But get back on the actual interview questions. So obviously, with you being a lawyer, you'd obviously found the standalone that you did before. You would have probably found that quite easy to write, because obviously you knew, like, from the juror's perspective, from like a court perspective, how everything ran. And then, so did you have to go back and actually use real life cases, or did you base anything on anything that you knew? Because obviously, from like the family side of that'd be quite a difficult. Obviously, like if it was a crime or something like that, it would be quite difficult to write about. So did you like go back and like look at old cases and like how things had panned out and use that in the book, or did you just kind of like ask like, even like some like the support networks and things like that you know deal with the victims of crime, what the kind of stories they've heard in like the past and things like that?
You know, I didn't go back to individual cases because that's a very difficult thing to do as a barrister. You know, there are all sorts of things which are confidential and which are too painful for clients, and you're almost always inevitably going to be going too far with what you reveal and kind of probably breaking some rules. So I would never write about a specific case that I dealt with. What I did do, though, was I have my clearest memories probably of my time at the bar are really of the personalities that I dealt with. And that isn't just the defendants, that's also the police officers or the judges or some witnesses and things like that. So what I definitely did was I took their personalities and some of their foibles or some of the things I admired about them. And I put a lot of that stuff into my characters. Certainly things about, there's an expert witness in the first book in Perfect Remains. And he was slightly taken from an expert witness, I remember, who was just bumptious and, you know, prideful and often wrong. And so those sorts of people, those people whose memories, the memories of them and their very strong character traits, they stay with you. And I know that I've written quite a lot of that into the books. Writing books for that reason is quite cathartic, actually. You can take all the people who have annoyed you over the years of a career, and there's my family in the background, bye-bye, and you can kind of write them into a story, and you can do horrible things to them if you want to, which is always good fun. And equally, there are people that I've admired and liked over time who I get to you know, kind of write down and appreciate forever in a book that won't disappear. So in some ways, it's a nice way to also pay people a compliment and to highlight them and to show them what you really thought of them. So yeah, not individual cases, but definitely parts of personalities of the people I dealt with.
Yeah, well, I mean, last year I was called to be a juror, and that experience for somebody who's read crime books for years, that was quite a daunting experience, actually walking up to the High Court in Dundee and actually seeing it all from like this perspective of like a juror and all the things I had to go through and the kind of like scary atmosphere that comes through it. And you kind of think because you've read all these books and watched all these TV programs and seen it all, you think, yeah, that is a fly on the wall kind of thing. I mean, everybody else I know gets, you know, when they see the envelope, they're like, oh no, I got it, and I was like, this is actually quite cool. It was like, only you could think that, Lynsey. But it was that actually walking up and going into it and the searches and going through, and you do feel quite scared, and then you obviously see them coming through and pulling you through and seeing all the police, and it is actually really daunting. I came out and I was like, yeah, I'm kind of glad I didn't get picked to sit on the actual jury then, because it was just like a really quite a scary-ish atmosphere. You just never know until you're actually in that situation and you know what it's actually like. So with the Callan Act and these lost and broken things, what one was easier for you to write, the series or just a completely different sort of standalone one that was like a historical? So you're a big history buff that you decided that, well, you know, I might this time instead of doing a legal kind of thriller, I'll do like a more historical one. Was there any reason for that, or was it just, as you said, to cleanse the palette and just get you away from writing a series?
Do you know what, actually, it's not anything except finding a character in your head who, and I think we all come up with new book ideas all the time. I watch Twitter constantly and see people go, oh, I had a great idea for a book today, And it's not, the great ideas aren't the ones that you're talking about on the day. The great ideas for books are the ones where you have an idea one day and it kind of just sits there, like the spider you can't reach in the corner of your bedroom. And it just doesn't go away. It sits there waiting for you to notice it and to do something more with it and to take it out and kind of, examine it a bit closer. And then you kind of go away and think, I'm not sure. But it's the ideas that quite often, I think, don't strike you on day one as being amazing. It's the ideas that won't get out of your head for a really sustained periods of time. And those are the books you should write. And what I found over the years is that the books that I end up writing are the ones where I can see the main character very, very clearly in my head, and they grow and grow and grow, and they take on a real personality, and they grow their own backstory, and they become very real and very alive in your imagination. Because for me, I don't write the pushing forth to write a story isn't plot based, it's character based. So, for example, in The Shadow Man, the protagonist is a profiler. She's an American psychological profiler. She comes from Massachusetts, and she had a head injury when she was 18 that left her unable to speak and eventually left her only able to see in black and white. And it was her I got to first. It wasn't the plot, it wasn't the murders. It was actually this woman who was literally physically seeing the world in black and white. And I got from her to the person that she was being asked to profile and that she was looking for. So I don't think necessarily there was a type of book that was easier to write or harder to write. I think that the different stories and the different characters developed at different paces, depending on how clearly I saw them. I've got another project on the go at the moment that I started to write a while ago, and for a variety of good reasons, not least because I have other deadlines. That book I've had to put on pause, and that's been harder to write. I've got to go back to it because I feel utterly compelled to write the particular story. I'm going to be going back to it starting again in September. But it's those ideas, it's those storylines that will not get out of your head. It's the ones that you have no choice but to carry on writing. Those are the ones. Sometimes they're easy, sometimes they're hard. Most people will say, you know what, I flew through writing that book in 4 months or 6 months, whatever it was. And then the next one will be like, kind of a sort of bloodletting. It'll be awful and a drag and painful. So I think we all have different experiences, which is not least to do with whatever else you've got going on in your life at the same time, and how much space you get to be creative and how much time you have in your hands. I think as writers, we often think that our writing existence is based around the books that we create. I think that's probably not right. I think you write your books around the edge of whatever else is happening in your life at the time.
So was there any particular reason why each of the books were set? Obviously the law thriller had to be set in like a courtroom kind of thing, but so like the Calvin Act was obviously set in Edinburgh, and then the newest one, if anybody's not read it yet, is obviously Scotland and France, and then obviously then these Lost and Broken Things is obviously a suffragette era London. Was there any particular reason for picking these? I know obviously Calvin, if anybody doesn't know, is obviously he wasn't born in France, was he? No, I can't remember. He
was born to a French mother and a Scottish father, actually born in Scotland, which is what enables him to go back and work in Scotland afterwards. But he's French. I mean, actually, he kind of had to be French because I needed a different nationality of character to pick up and drop in the middle of Police Scotland. So I needed somebody who was going to be make a huge difference compared to the kind of Scottish police. So I needed someone who culturally was going to appear very, very different. And that's Luke, the main character. Obviously, the suffragette book, that just had to be London because that was where the kind of recognisable bulk of the suffragette movement was working at the time and proceeding at the time. And I wanted that as the background. Because actually that's where, because it's about the difference between a very wealthy industrialist and really stark poverty. So I wanted to be able to set it in these very opulent, luxurious gaming houses compared to the kind of political struggles going on, compared to the really desperate poverty there still was in London in the Edwardian era. So that was the place where there was the easiest focus. In terms of setting the Kalanach books and the standalone that's coming up, Shadow Man in Scotland, that was a personal choice. It's just, a place where I feel very at home and the country that I love the most, and a place where I felt I could do justice to the stories I wanted to write. Edinburgh in particular has this extraordinary Gothic feel, an amazing sense of history and timelessness, but also it's where everyone wants to go, or where everyone's been, whether it's from an American looking for culture, or whether it's a stag party or a hen party, or it's with somebody who loves books and wants to do a literary tour. Edinburgh's a place that people from all over the world want to go and can recognise. So often I get comments back about books, about the settings of the books. And it's lovely now, people, contact me and say, oh, I went to Edinburgh and I went to the Pear Tree, or, I went to somewhere in the book and I went there because I read it in your book. And that's really lovely, because actually when you can take someone's imagination, not just create characters in a story, but take them into the heart of a city or a country or a town, and describe it to them well enough that they feel inspired to go and actually physically visit those places, then that's a real gift. That's a great thing.
So do you have to do a lot of research for your novels? Obviously you would have had to done a lot for the suffragettes, the historical, to get it bang on right, but do you have to sort of like contact Police Scotland, and do you have a contact that you speak to about writing the books, or do you just kind of like from like your knowledge kind of write it? Because I'm right in saying that you live in America, is that right? Yes,
so I spent the last 3 years living in California, and actually, which is one of the reasons why the Shadow Man, the profiler, is an American woman. And actually what happened in that situation was that one of my new neighbors in California, who became a very good friend, had a contact who worked within the FBI. He is a forensic profiler, and they were able to put me in contact with the FBI. I sent the FBI all of my case notes for my antagonist. And I said, if you were profiling this man, what would the procedure be that you'd go through? And what would you be looking for? How would you do it? How do you think you'd get to the end of it? And the FBI were amazing. I had a long conversation with the profiler. She'd looked up all of the syndromes. She'd gone through the psychology. She'd thought about the forensics involved in the offences. And that allowed it on a research basis to be incredibly realistic. I was extremely lucky to have been able to do that. I mean, just a complete fangirling by the time you've got the FBI on the phone and some profiler kind of looking at your stuff. It was really amazing. It was a great opportunity. But those are the sorts of lengths I'll go to. So the kind of language I've used in the next book is the language given to me, and Molly, the profiler, was saying things like, at that point we would do what we call a frantic information grab, and that involves, getting together every photo, every file, every bit of information, and we put it all in a room when we get stuck, and we do this grab, and we go back through, but we cram ourselves with every single bit of information. And it's things like that it's very hard to come up with that language and those processes without going back to square one on your research, and really, really working hard. So I do that. If I've got medical questions, I'll phone doctor friends. I don't usually ask for a lot of help with things like the personalities of my bad guys. That comes from me. I do still make mistakes. I made a mistake with the color of some crime scene tape in one book, and I was told off for it, and I make that mistake again. And I should have looked up with it. But actually, the point at which you make mistakes is the very little things that you don't realize you don't know, right? So if I need to know what type of fracture bones are likely to suffer from a massive fall, I know that I'm going to have to do some medical research. I know I'm going to have to talk to a doctor. I know I'm going to have to be really careful about it. It's when you think you know something and that it doesn't occur to you can be wrong. That's when you get a detail wrong. It's really funny. Proofreaders do a lot of this for you. So I've got amazing proofreaders and copy editors, and they'll go through, and I think it was one of the books where there was a character from Edinburgh University, and they said, oh, she's that character's doing a course which would have clashed with something else happening at the time, so that couldn't have happened. And they don't just go through, they're not just reading the words, but they'll go through and go, Arthur, you've got the elevation of Arthur's seat wrong by kind of 100 feet, and if you're going to put it in there, you've got to get it right. And those sorts of things that I'm occasionally picked up on. Obviously, for the historical stuff, I know that I've got to research that really, really well. And in some ways, that's easier because you're starting from scratch. So it's modern day stuff that I think I probably more often need to be super careful about. But I love the research element of my books. It's the stuff that makes writing the book really, really interesting for me. I'm writing a book at the moment. I'll tell you a bit more about this. I'm writing a book that has some historical witchcraft elements to it. And I am spending a lot of time going down rabbit holes on Google, reading about the history of witchcraft in Scotland. But it's just brilliant. And I'll get to the end of the day and I go, oh, I did 4 hours of reading based on, Scottish witchcraft, none of which I can put in the book, but it's been absolutely brilliant fun, just kind of, looking it up.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Well, I did culture studies when I was at school, and all the old stories that they had, like the two sisters and the stepmother and things like that. And I know a few authors have done that. I've taken these traditional old folklore Scottish stories and put them in and turned them into like modern day crime stories, because once you read them, you think, okay, yeah, that was hearsay. But then when you think of it as a crime brain and you think murder and you think, oh, this, and then like Sonny Bean, and you kind of think, well, actually, you could see it becoming a modern day crime thriller, or even a historical crime thriller. But you can kind of see Scotland's great. You just take a story and just like, all right, make it a modern day crime story, because they all seem to fit really well into that pigeonhole. I don't know if Scotland were just a bloody nation, basically, but a lot of the stories you could really imagine them as a crime, even as a thriller book or a crime book at some point. So of each of your books, do you have a particular favourite character, or character that you really enjoy writing about, or does it change, or you just kind of go with the flow and you just have you don't have any characters you're like, yes, I want them to do this, and yes, it's their story I need to get across, or?
Absolutely. In the Callanach books, it's Superintendent Overbeck, who is evil and mean and just a terrifying and awful human being. And she is so much fun to write. And what goes alongside her is Sergeant Lively. And of course, the two of them, obviously, spoiler alert, but they end up having a brief affair in the middle of the series. And he is just kind of loud and vulgar and just kind of, doesn't get on with Luke Callanach for the first half of the books, but then things start to shift. And it's quite interesting where you write those characters who seem to have real extremes about them. It gives you more scope to shift the characters and to write in a greater character arc. But also those characters lend themselves the best to the funniest dialogue. And Overbeck particularly, I've always said if the series gets made into a TV series, I absolutely reserve the right to play Superintendent Overbeck. She is the most fun, and it's kind of those 6-inch spike heels and the killer nails and the great one-liners. And she seems to get all of them, and I don't even feel like I write those. Overbeck has taken on a life of her own as she writes her own dialogue now. She really is just a dreadful person. So they are absolutely my favourites. The American Profiler, I've obviously finished all the editing on that. She was great fun because she's incredibly blunt and just really, takes no prisoners and says it like it is, but with a quite an amount of laid back American charm. So she's blunt, but can't really even be bothered to be rude. She just kind of, saying what she thinks. She was really good fun to write. And also in that book, in The Shadow Man, there's a 12-year-old girl who is held hostage. And the 12-year-old girl, Meggie, also absolutely takes on a life of her own, and became a really, really good fun character to write. So I think there's always one or two in each book that are more fun than anyone else. I'm always going to love Ava Turner. She holds a special place in my heart. But kind of, you have to watch your main characters. You can't make them too extreme. You can't make them suddenly do anything completely out of character or crazy, or make them do anything for which there'll be consequences for future books, which means that quite often your lead characters, you have to be more kind of circumspect about writing, which is why I think the side characters, those little other characters who just pop up every now and again, become more fun to write.
So do you have a favourite scene in all of your books, or any of the books from the Calnac to the standalones, that you thought was like the most fun to write, or it was the most disturbing to write, or the most scariest to write?
Do you know what? There's a scene at this. There's a scene at the start of. There are two answers to that. The scene at the start of Perfect Silence, which was the fourth one in the series, and in fact, it's the opening chapter where the girl is. She's been very badly hurt, badly mutilated, and then dumped at the side of a road, and she's crawling along the road, bleeding very badly. And as she crawls along the road, determined not to give up, she's thinking about her life and about all the events that got her to that night. And eventually she knows she's going to die, but doesn't want to die with her face down, looking at the road. And so with the last breath and the last bit of effort she has in her body, she makes herself roll over so that she can die and have her last breath looking up at the stars and looking up at the Scottish night sky. And she's thinking about the fact she's going to be reunited with her childhood dog that she loved more than anyone, in a very difficult childhood. That scene was hugely moving to me as I wrote it, for no other reason than I just felt the pain of that character terribly when I wrote it. And I hope it comes through in the writing when you read it. And that scene stayed with me for a really long time. And when I really think about it, I get quite emotional. It's more like a memory of something that happened than it is a memory of something I wrote. The other scene that's hugely, for totally different reasons, that stayed with me is there's a scene in the basement of a club in Glasgow, which I think is in Perfect Prey. I could be getting it wrong. It's one of the problems with having the word perfect in all your book titles, where you've got both Sergeant Lively and you've got Luke Calnac and you've got the journalist Lance Proudfoot, and they're all downstairs and tied up in the bottom of this nightclub, and they're being very badly beaten, and they know they're probably going to get killed. And was really funny is that the Sergeant Lively character, who hasn't got on very well with Luke for a really long time, suddenly things start to shift, and they realise, that they don't know if they're going to live or die, but they do know that they've got to do their best to fight together and get out of it. But it's also just a very, very funny scene. The way it turned out was really quite funny. And writing the dialogue with these kind of sort of, kind of aging Glaswegian kind of mobsters and this very dry journalist and these two cops who have been at each other's throats since the day they met, all shoved down in one cellar to see who lived and who died. That was really good fun, and I love that scene. Yeah.
So have you had the opportunity to write a novel in any other genre apart from crime or thriller, what would you choose and why?
I can't give very much away. There might be a speculative fiction thing kind of bubbling away. I'd love that. I'm a huge fan of Margaret Atwood. Absolutely massive. I think she is both a genre-defining author and a generationally defining author. I think her imagination is limitless, even though I know that she says about her work, and it's true, she puts nothing in her books that hasn't really happened. And I feel the same about the way I write. I'm very careful to make sure that everything I write has a basis in credibility, in fact. And I think that those sorts of writers, those sorts of authors are the ones that change. They don't just change our perception of the world, they change the world. And I look at the way The Handmaid's Tale spurred a generation of women to walk out onto the streets in kind of red gowns with white caps on and protest misogyny and the way women are treated and the way we have, what right we have to say what should happen with our bodies. And that genre of writing is so incredibly powerful because it gets to talk about wider and broader social issues, and it gets to make us look at the choices we make. And when we make choices, big choices and little choices, the way they can affect the way that our children will be treated, or they're going to affect the way our planet is treated, or the way politics impacts us. And so that's something I think if I was going to try and really do something a little bit different and have a crack at something I've not done before, it would be that kind of, probably not as far as dystopian, but definitely speculative fiction.
Yeah. So we'll go back. So if there was any, so if you could collaborate, so if you could join up with any other crime author, and they can be alive or dead, to write a novel, who would you choose and why?
Okay, and if I've got to stick to crime writers, if I have to, can I pick two?
I mean, you can do a crime writer and you can do a non-crime writer as well. This is just a question that I've thrown in on the blog in the last to place ones about awards and stuff like that, because you feel bad that some people don't always get the #1 Amazon Prime spots and things like that. So I've just started throwing this one in, and everybody's like, "Oh wow, it makes you think." And some people are like, I wouldn't do, because I can't write with anyone else. And I was like, that's fair enough. It's just a question, just a cheeky question to throw in, sort of thing.
It's a great question. Crime writer, I would probably, and this is a bit controversial because there are all sorts of issues about whether or not he writes all of his own books now and this sort of thing. I would love to write one with James Patterson. The earlier novels of his, like Along Came a Spider, those books were really they really affected my desire to read crime, and I know that he's diversified since then. He writes now everything from children's to YA to you name it, but the cross novels that he wrote were really iconic. And he is an absolute master at coming up with these plot lines that are entirely credible, and yet have these kind of ticking clock feel to them. And that's what I like. I like that when I read. I like to be really compelled to turn the page and to read the next chapter. I think James Patterson's crime novels do that in that extraordinary way. Those short chapters and that quick fire action were really masterful. And so I'd love to do one with Patterson. I think he's, he really kind of changed and upped the game in terms of modern crime writing. I say modern crime writing, you've going back to the kind of, 90s. early 90s, but it was those novels. I mean, and you can't go in a bookshop without seeing 30 of his novels lining a couple of shelves, which is quite a legacy. So that's it. And obviously, if I was going to write outside my genre, I wouldn't write romance. I can't do that. People die too quickly when I write romance. It just starts off being romance, and then there's a dead body hidden in the wardrobe. So I can't do that. But I would love to write, if I could press a button and have a wish, it would be sitting with Margaret Atwood and spending a year kind of figuring out what the next horrible thing that's going to happen to the world is, and writing something suitably terrifying to get us to open our eyes.
Oh, definitely, because I mean, as soon as The Handmaid's Tale came out, everybody was like, and obviously all the political things in America, people were like, is America moving towards the actual dystopian Handmaid's Tale? Is Margaret Atwood's books, is she predicting the future of what it's going to be like? And then obviously you've got everything that's happened with lockdown and coronavirus that makes people think of things like George Oswald and the 1984 and things like that, and you think, well, actually, because I remember like 2000 and after the millennium, people were saying, well, in this date, when they went back to the future, they portrayed this date and this is what they said. Do you think in that time we will have hoverboards and this and this and this and this? And you think, nah, that was just Hollywood that produced that, or an author produced that. But in actual fact, some people saying, well, some authors will predict what's happening to us currently just now. And you think, well, you never know. So there you go. It is scary. It's a very scary world that we live in. So do you have any words of wisdom or advice that you can share with any budding, not just crime authors, but any budding authors out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is this. You're not really defined as a writer by your ability to come up with a quick, good idea or to be able to start writing a book. You're defined as a writer by your ability to write the difficult bit of the book and come through to the end. So I think, kind of most adults with a reasonable imagination can write the first 25,000 words. It's the 25,000 words, the 30,000 words after that are really difficult to write, and then to tie it all together at the end. So the process you have to go through is finding the discipline to start writing and to write all the way to the end of the book. I heard some great advice right outside her genre, but the advice is good for everybody. When I first started, I went to a writing course at a college in West Sussex, and Francesca Simon, who writes the Horrid Henry books, was one of the speakers. And she was asked the same question at the end, and she said, what's the advice for all the would-be writers in the room? And she said, give yourself permission to write a bad first draft, but finish it. And that is really sound advice. It always will be, because you can't edit something you haven't written. You can't improve something you haven't written. You can't find the plot holes in something you haven't written. And it doesn't matter if it's rubbish. But from those humble beginnings of an idea, and from those terrible sentences where you get your grammar wrong, and you use the same word 3 times, and you do terrible things, and you fall into all sorts of cliches about sparkling blue eyes or whatever it is, you get to change all of it. But you're never going to be a writer unless you start writing a manuscript and you finish writing a manuscript. And it's that discipline. And actually, there's no writer in the world who sits down and writes a book first time that doesn't need changing. And people that think they've done that are, deeply deluded. So it's about finding the discipline. Writing is 99% discipline. Yes, there has to be a little tiny bit of talent, and yes, there has to be actually a little bit of luck, I'm afraid to say, and you have to make some good choices, and you have to work hard on social media, all that stuff. 99% of it is discipline. The good news about that is that means that if you're prepared to work hard and just slog away and put the hours in, It means that you can do it. Because it's not some raw talent. There's no magic. No one's going to come and sprinkle writing dust on you in the middle of the night. It is about the desire to get to the end of a project and then to go back and polish it and polish it and polish it and to realize that some of it's trash. So that's my advice, is that you can do it as long as you really don't mind hard work. The quicker advice for that is also develop really thick skin. Because between getting turned down by agents and publishers and bad reviews and there'll be a book or two of yours where the sales aren't great, these things are inevitable. So develop thick skin, because otherwise it's terribly hard to get through it without getting your confidence knocked.
Thank you. And so the last question, you've obviously talked about Shadowman, your next book out, but do you have any other exciting news or books in the pipeline that you kind of want to work towards maybe in the future that you've kind of got an idea for? I mean, I know a lot of authors have said during lockdown that they've just gone from one book and then they've gone, what else am I going to do? I'm going to start the next book. So have you got anything, any mind ticking, thinking, oh, my next step might be to do this or to do that?
Yeah, I mentioned very briefly the book that has elements of kind of witchcraft folklore. I'm about 2/3 through writing that. That book, which will come out in 2022, is set on the Isle of Mull. It is modern day. Again, there are a couple of familiar characters from the Callanach books, although it's a standalone, that will be popping up in that one. And that is about a private investigator, a young Canadian private investigator, who is hired by a family to go and find their missing teenage daughter. She goes missing and is found in a very famous cave on Mull, McKinnon Cave. And she's found with a seaweed crown twined on her head. And she's found with her mouth packed full of sand. And that is the start of the book. And what happens from there on, as other women go missing or are killed, it becomes more obvious that there's something very, very strange and spooky happening on the island as these women disappear. And as each one is found with a mouth packed full of sand. I am writing that at the moment. I'm going to be finished with it very, very soon. It is freaking me out while I write it. Anything to do with sand now makes me flag immediately. But as I say, the research for it has been absolutely fascinating, really fascinating. Mull itself was rumored not just to have had one very famous witch from there, but to have spawned an entire race of witches. So I couldn't have chosen anywhere better. And an absolutely stunning island. I'm delighted to have the chance to set a book with that location. That's really exciting, and I can't wait for people to read that one.
So did you actually do any research for that before? Obviously, there's no travel, so I'm assuming that you've actually also had to do a lot of online research for Mull, or have you actually previously visited Mull and been able to use that as your inspiration for the novel, yeah. Or is it just completely?
I haven't been recently. I would like to have been in the last 2 months, and I was planning to go very soon. I will be getting there very soon. So it's based on partly on older knowledge that I have. I'm also in touch with a couple of people from Tobermory who I got in contact with to say, can you check this out? Kind of what's here. There's a brilliant bookshop there called Tackling Books and things like that. So I've been able to get in touch with people just to help me. It helped me tremendously. My husband's been there very recently and brought back, tons of photos and things for me. Yes, kind of a mixture of research for that one. I will be heading up there just as soon as it's safe. I've only just come out of quarantine, having come back from America. So I'm not going very far at the moment, but I will be just as soon as.
So you're not in America just now then?
No. I've just moved back to the UK. I've just come out of my 2 weeks of enforced quarantine. I'm going to be based in the UK for the next 2 years before possibly moving back to Central America. But that's more exciting stuff to come from there. Yeah.
So will we see the return of Luke and Ava anytime soon, or are you kind of taking a wee back seat to write some standalones?
Yeah, well, the standalones are getting rid at the moment, but there will be a return to Luke and Ava. Those guys have got some more to do. We have yet to see if Natasha is going to recover from her breast cancer. And unfortunately, there is one popular and beloved character who I think may not make it through for much longer. I can't say anything more about that. But yes, we definitely will be revisiting Luke and Ava.
That's brilliant. Well, that's the time up. It doesn't feel like it's been an hour, but thank you so much for taking part in this, Helen. And I just want to say, one of the other authors, I was doing a practice chat with him last night, Owen Mullen. Just wanted to say a quick hello to you because he met you at I think he said it was Bloody Scotland or something. I know I met you at I Write, and it was just, I can't remember if I'd just seen your books in like one of the magazines, like the Scotsman, advertising it, and then I'd seen you like appearing, and I was like, okay, Bob's got me tickets for that one, that's great. And then I got chatting to you in that lift, I think, and just introduced myself. I was like, well, how did you get this author and how did you get that one? And I'm like, Facebook, and introducing myself, and they're like, oh, I wouldn't have the guts to do that. I'm like, you just get chatting, and then you just hand the card. That's pretty much it. And then you've got a long list with people to come and help you do things like this. So
yeah, it's great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for inviting me on, Lynsey. I really appreciate it. It's been great fun.
Not a problem. It has, hasn't it? Yeah, definitely. A bit daunting, doing it one-to-one rather than, because obviously me, it's always email and emailing back and forth, but doing it face-to-face, it feels, it is quite daunting, but it's loads of fun because, I mean, it's just you get the connection that you obviously don't get from the reading of it. So thank you so much for doing this, Helen.
That's
I look forward to reading your books in the future.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Lynsey.
You're welcome. Bye. Have a good night.
Bye.